Okay, kids, it's time for another episode of the Fueled by Weird podcast, the podcast that prefers Beekman's World over Bill Nye the Science Guy, and I will die on that hill. I am Chris Daly, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with DM Ray. DM, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well. A good opener. I have never watched Beekman's World. I have seen an episode or two of Bill Nye. I know
Yeah,
he was more mainstream, but
yeah.
that's a very interesting thing to bring up to highlight a description of yourself. That's really cool.
Well, usually on these, I kind of customize every single intro, so there's not one of my shows that has the exact same intro. And
Gotcha.
I was kind of looking for something for this one, and I was just doom scrolling through social media, and some of these pages, these 90s nostalgia pages pop up, and one of them was talking about Beekman's World, and I was like, oh, okay. I remember that show from when I was a kid. I don't know why I never got that much into Bill Nye. I mean, he's still really great, but I ended up watching Beekman's World more than Bill Nye. So I just
Now, Beekman's World, he what station was he on? Was there a certain network he was attached to?
I can't remember. I think it
Like
was
whenever I watched Bill Nye, it was always on either I believe it was not PBS. There was a Canadian equivalent called Television Ontario that I
uh,
watched him a lot on. But I bet you I never watched Beekman because of the certain networks that I watched from the States.
that might be. I'm gonna see really quick if I can. Oh, looks like CBS.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense then.
One of just like the free channels if you didn't have cable.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, it's just random. Every single episode has a little bit different intro, and that just happened to be today.
I like it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. So this is the first time we're meeting face to face. We've done a little bit of chatting over Messenger. And usually I like to start these things off with an icebreaker question. So today's icebreaker question is if space travel was available to everyone, would you go? And if not, what what thing could be brought up that would sway your choice?
Now that one's a tough that one I've never actually considered. The first thoughts that go through my mind would be you look at something like the one of the most recent topics is the colonization of Mars. Well, Mars
Mhm.
has a different gravity, and I've seen in some sci-fi interpretations people are taller and weaker, or how does it work? Either way, the gravity's different, so
Yeah.
their whole structure, their whole body is a different. There'd be a lot of adaptation.
Hmm.
I- If if civilization was capable of these things and going to those limits, I guess the real question would be whether I'd be willing to be a guinea pig for such variables, different radiation, different bacteria, different gravity, and many other things. I'm a father of three, so I think that would also be a variable as to why it'd be difficult to go. My oldest one, he'll be turning 8 next week. A lot of firsts there. I wouldn't want to miss that. And
Yeah.
then in turn, if they were all brave enough to decide, let's all do this and travel, well, do I want them to be guinea pigs or would I rather them have a stable, more guaranteed, for lack of better wording, normal of life?
Yeah.
Lots of questions there. I've never been asked that. The last thing you said there is what would need to be done to be swayed. If it was all figured out, if it was safe, if everything was good, there would be no problem. I think that'd be an interesting adventure, assuming the rest of my family would want to go, of course.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm a father of two. And my youngest actually will be turning 9 in a couple months. So
Awesome.
pretty close to the same age. But yeah, if my family wasn't into it, I definitely probably wouldn't go. Whole different story if this was, 20 some odd years ago before I had kids and all of that stuff. But yeah, you would definitely have to really, really convince me to go. I mean, as cool as it would be, like you said, there are way too many variables that would need to be addressed before I would sign on and say, heck yeah, let's go.
Even money, I think would, I mean, it'd be compelling if I could guarantee my kids are set for life financially.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, but at the same time, just because you have money doesn't mean you know how to use it well.
Yeah, it's for
And
sure.
it's my responsibility to raise these kids to be responsible and to be able to live without me eventually. Right
Yeah.
now, at the ages of the kids that we have, yeah, I don't even think. uh, empire caliber wealth would be enough.
I agree for sure. All right, so the point of the show Fueled by Weird basically is, all the hobbies and interests, all the stuff that you like to do kind of come together to make you who you are and essentially, they're the things that fuel your weird. So what things, what some of your hobbies, some of your interests that you want to talk about?
I love comic books, medieval fantasy. Um, I used to like a lot of TV shows, but that's kind of phased out with my age. And it's either I'm turning into a curmudgeon and just thinking they don't make them like they used to,
Yeah,
or the field is very different and it's just not my flavor. I don't know how else to put that, but
gotcha.
when I was a kid, I have a brother who's almost 5 years older than me, and he was in that era, like the late 70s he was born, and I was born in the early mid 80s.
So was I.
And yeah, right on. I was born 84.
Me too.
Nice, right on. Uh, Good year, aside from the Orwellian novel, of course,
Yeah.
but there's a really that was a really cool era of when comic books, cartoons, and toy companies made this alliance and made a lot of cool things because of it. And it was a
Yeah.
really weird time where cartoons, in some cases, were made just to sell toys. And nowadays, that's not as uncommon, but at the time, it was very revolutionary. So I liked
Yeah.
watching a lot of and comic books already mentioned. So there was like I liked watching the '60s Spider-Man, but there was also '80s Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Spider-Man is Amazing Friends. My brother was a big fan of the Hulk, and that was a one-season cartoon which we liked really cool.
Yeah.
And at the time, again, another cool thing, which is now not a big deal, but in one episode of the Hulk, I remember him fighting Doctor Octopus, and that was just a big deal because that was a crossover in a
Yeah.
way because that was Spidey's enemy,
Mhm.
and to see him fighting Iceman, Firestorm, and Spidey, and then all of a sudden he's there with the Hulk, that was really cool.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
the toys, my brother was big into He-Man, Transformers, G.I. Joe. I was more in the tail end of the era, much like yourself. So Ninja Turtles just got a chokehold on me and ruled
Oh
my
yeah.
life for the first 10 decade of my life.
Big time.
Um, but during that era, um, I the back half of that Ninja Turtles season, or not season, series, I didn't really watch it too much. I never saw any of the Red Sky episodes from the last three seasons, Drag or all those characters.
Mhm.
And then other things came into play. I've talked about this a lot in the past. Batman, they made an animated series with Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill.
Yep.
I wasn't a fan of the '90s Spider-Man animated series. I felt a lot of characters were rushed just for the sake of having them on, just for the sake of
Okay.
selling the toy.
Yeah.
I thought Venom was butchered, but it was also at the same time really cool because it ushered in a lot of people my age weren't a fan of comic books, and that cartoon kind of gave it a resurgence, a spike in popularity where I was. And a guilty pleasure, you weren't allowed to like this at school, but I loved Power Rangers. I watch it right
Oh
now with my
man.
kids a little bit.
Oh
You
man.
weren't allowed to like it because it was always like, oh, this is
Yep.
terrible. Look, there's a spark on somebody's chest and they're flying back on the ground.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah. Um,
I
I
remember I would go to school and I'd be like, Mom, this episode of Power Rangers is gonna be on during school. I can't miss this. You have to record it for me. I have to see who the Green Ranger is, man. They're gonna do the
That's
big
right.
reveal. I gotta know.
I must know. Oh, that's
Yeah.
yeah. That was a thing.
That was big
Um,
time stuff.
and you look back now, and it's obvious how they took the stock Japanese footage from Super Sentai,
Oh
and
yeah.
it was really hard watching them try to retain those suits through the other seasons with Zords from different seasons, and some of it is almost well, I should just say it's proudly cringeworthy.
Yeah.
But during all of that era, I liked being a '90s kid. I liked doing things like reading Goosebumps books. I never collected Pogs, but I played with them with friends at recess. And
Hmm.
um, during that whole era, I really liked going to a comic shop and buying back issues. And where a
Yeah.
lot of people in the early mid '90s, when Marvel started, they're right on a teetering point of making some serious mistakes. although people consider it cool now, Scarlet Spider and the whole Clone Wars of Spider-Man. Um, I didn't like those. I didn't like that style of comic book. Digital coloring was a new thing, so very few were good at it. My comic book, I've got one of the originals who's the man. He's colored over 100 issues of Spawn, Dan Kemp. But he would be a great example. The average person was not at that man's caliber. Even now, I consider him world caliber. But
Hmm.
anytime I watch something like X-Men, Days, or why can't not Days of Apocalypse,
Days of the Future Past.
not Days of Future Past. That was more 80s. But anyways, Age of Apocalypse is one thing. I don't know why I was saying Days of Apocalypse. But anyways, the stories were interesting in
Yeah.
some parts, but visually it all looked plastic, excessively shiny and stuff. They didn't have, like I mentioned, Dan Kemp. He knew exactly how to make it look what it was supposed to look like. I ended up going to local comic shops and looking for things in the 80s and the 70s. And I love the visuals, but I wanted to know these cool little stories. I would find like reprint of Amazing Spider-Man with the first appearance of Scorpion. And one of the coolest
Mhm.
things I like about that story is Peter Parker, that first 2 years of Peter Parker as Spider-Man, he goes through a lot of character arcs of getting very confident and then humbled. The first time it happens is with Doc Ock. I believe that's issue 3 or 4. I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyways, he's I'm the man, and then he meets Doc Ock and he gets pummeled and realizes, okay, let's be a little smarter here. Going back to the story with Scorpion and J. Jonah Jameson accidentally creating this monster, Peter gets beat really bad, and then he has to basically tactically outwit him. I'm faster, or I'm at least as fast. He's stronger. I can't let him touch me. How do I keep him from moving? And I'm moving all the time. And he does things like webs up his feet and a bunch of various other things. And at the end, he wins, but much like a some type of title fight with between two pugilists, you see the champion. Usually, his face is ground hamburger. He has to
Yeah.
take. He's going to be taking some hits too. It's not about being unscathed. It's about winning.
Right.
And I really liked those stories. I'm not saying those things didn't happen in the 90s. I just liked how it was portrayed better in those previous years.
I get it.
Um, Something I really appreciated exiting the 90s is I don't know how else to put it, but just depth of character and repercussions and stuff. First one that comes to mind is Brian Michael Bendis. I stopped collecting comics for a little bit. He got me back into it with House of M. I heard all this great stuff he did with Avengers and this cool dynamics like bringing in Wolverine and Spider-Man, and Thor
Mhm.
was completely like not a thing at the time. And we kind of the 90s was like love-hate relationship for me. I just liked all the cool things about the comics, but there was some things that just really grated with me. But
That's
I
fair.
digress.
Nice. Well, yeah, it sounds like, you and I had pretty similar childhoods, especially with the stuff we were into. Going back to Power Rangers, I had realized that, somewhere along the way I had dropped out of watching Power Rangers after being very heavily into it. And luckily, with, technology nowadays, Netflix, and it's got all that back stuff. So I started kind of going through watching back on the old stuff. And yes, I can confirm after watching it very recently that it's still pretty cringeworthy, but and there was even a few episodes where, when Megazord was fighting the monster after it grew, there was unexplainably some Japanese kid in the fight, and he was like crying, which was kind of weird, and he was almost as big as Megazord. So I'm like, what even is this? But
One
yeah,
of
a lot of that stuff's on for free on YouTube now, which is cool. A lot of the old seasons that aren't currently streaming, someone has them up on YouTube, which is nice to kind of be able to catch up that way.
one my kids are watching it with me on Netflix right now, and we're deep into season 3, and that's when it's past Thunder Zords and into Ninja Zords, and
Yeah.
when the company's just trying to hold the franchise together before, okay, we have to accept the costumes have to change. That way we can actually have footage of people in costumes with the Zords, and we can
Yeah.
get back to how season 1 was. And one of the biggest disappointments right now my kids are having with is in season two when they had the transfer of power, and that's when the three of the originals they
Yeah,
left about a pay dispute, and then three
yeah,
other actors are brought in. So depending how long we go with this, if they watch season four, which is all about Zeo and all the Zeozords, it's my favorite season, even though I like the Mighty Morphin Saga.
yeah,
Eventually, the Sixth Ranger comes in that I think they'll really appreciate that surprise of the Gold Ranger.
yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of cool watching it through my kids again. I love
Yeah,
that.
and I kind of fell off, I think, during Zeo, and I was able to get back in, and yeah, the I won't spoil anything, but the addition of the Gold Ranger was kind of cool.
Yeah. Oh, it was amazing.
Yeah, the
It really
transfer of power when that one was just since
was unfortunate.
they had already left, and so they had to kind of cut old footage to and old audio to make it work because the actors were already gone. It was
Or photo magic where they have body doubles. You can't really see their faces in a lot of cases.
it was such a mess. But man, that yeah, there's some good stuff there. I need to go back and finish that, or even just rewatch Mighty Morphin because man, big fan.
Yeah.
Um, Anyway, before we get too off track, I want to kind of go off into, you had mentioned writing comic books. I want to kind of get into what was it originally that got you interested in writing in the first place? Like
Okay.
what made you want to become a writer?
It's actually a pretty good segue. Something else I didn't get into much until I was in my late 20s was tabletop RPGs and specific Dungeons and Dragons.
I was gonna ask. Okay.
So this comic, this miniseries that I am releasing is actually based off of the first homebrew campaign I ever ran over a
Mm,
decade ago.
okay.
The main difference is all of the characters, all of the players' characters I removed, and I made my own characters that are based off of the players, ironically.
Okay. Very cool. Um, so was there like a certain thing from when you were a kid that made you want to start becoming a writer, or just, just playing D&D? Was that what kind of got you into wanting to become a writer?
I realized I didn't hear that question originally.
Oh, that's okay.
I get you now.
No worries.
One thing I wanted to do, I love to draw. I'm an artist at heart. It is not something I was able to develop past my adolescence. And my mother once she found a comic book course for kids in this little town called Dundas in Ontario. Dundas Valley School of Art. I'll give a shout out to them. And you got to make your own comic book, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I made a character that was because of that era in the 90s. The 90s had a lot of visual influence. Um, one character not didn't take off too much was called Backlash from Image Comics. And I'm for the comic book that I had to make at the time. Visually, he looked a lot like Backlash, but with longer hair, and he was kind of like this mutant eel, and with his weird electric powers and stuff. It lasted like I think I got halfway through the third issue before I got bored with it.
Okay.
I had a lot of like responsibilities and stuff. I don't want to sound like I was an overburdened kid. I wasn't, but between sports and homework and things, I just kind of the comic book went to the side for me.
Sure.
That was the first time I took an attempt at writing a comic style story. And I never really got into it again until much later. Um, I have on the back burner, I'm making a board game. And
Oh,
in,
nice.
in this board game, I hired a local artist to give me some of the characters' looks and stuff, and he makes his own comics. So shout out to Evan Quirin. Evan Quiring is he has his own books out one's called Murder City Devil, another one's called Lucha Mysteries. He
Oh,
does some
nice.
really cool stuff. He's also as he did this for me, I asked him, you know what, I've had this idea for a comic for a while, so it's been playing D&D forever, and he agreed to do the interiors for issue one. So that was more or less how I kind of fumbled into getting this comic finally on the go. Through that time, I was very fortunate to find like amazing talent. There's I mentioned Evan Quiring, Dan Kemp. I already mentioned who colored all of Evan Quiring's work. Beautiful colorist. Some of the cover artists, the main cover is done by Jimbo Salgado. He's done a lot for like Batman Unhinged. If
Oh,
you just
wow.
type in on Google Jimbo Salgado art, he's beautiful. His line work is just amazing.
Very cool.
And then I got artists that I was a big fan of since I was a kid. The first one to mention is Harvey Salterra's rather. He did the first year of Ghost Rider in the 90s, the Dan Ketch era, where eventually Johnny Blaze tries to hunt him down, the original Ghost Rider. Another one was John Zalesnik, who hand painted a cover for me, and he's done a lot for like Magic the Gathering and
That's cool.
Warhammer, and the original Shinobi for the NES.
Hmm.
That that cover art is done by John Selesnik. So I
That's
somehow I
cool.
I got these people that have had a passive influence on my life growing up.
Yeah,
I got them to make characters that I created, which I
that's
always think is
awesome.
just awesome.
That is awesome. Now, for people who don't know, your comic series that you're writing right now is called the Madcaps. For those that don't know, we've kind of talked a little bit about how it was inspired by a D&D game you ran, your first D&D game. Let's talk about a little bit about what the story is about.
Okay, so if you were to any human being when they get old enough, there's certain people you just don't get to see as much as you used to. A certain circle of friends, and there could be
Yeah.
various reasons for this. Responsibility, maybe you moved away, and I'm sure there's many other reasons you don't get to hang out as much as you used to.
Yeah.
This book, there's a 3-issue miniseries. It's based off of that level of camaraderie and how one acts around their friends versus how one would act in front of family. If there was some unrealistic global proportion bad thing happening in where I'm living right now in my city, I'm thinking right now, how do I keep my children safe? But if I'm hanging out with some friends and I'm not a parent, I'm looking at that very different. So the common thread is, like I said, about camaraderie. However, the first issue, they all just meet up for the first time in a while back in their hometown, and they get caught in the scenario of an undead outbreak. And after staving off this outbreak, they conclude. One of them rather concludes there's some type of connection between what just happened and a local drug problem. So since they're all together, well, let's just see where this metaphorical rabbit hole goes, and that is pretty much all of issue one. The coolest thing about this story is it all takes place over one night, and the each issue gets progressively more intense with the stakes raising accordingly. So issue two, it's not a filler issue, but in turn it adds from issue one, and there's lots of cool setups for the finale after the fact in issue number three.
That's awesome. So basically just a bunch of friends who, have been separated for whatever reason, just because when you grow up, life happens and you don't get to hang out
Yes.
like you used to. They all come back together to solve some kind of problem. That's really cool.
Yeah, and they're kind of in the wrong place at the right time. These are not the mightiest of characters in the realm. These
Right.
people, actually, in the first issue, three of them almost get killed during the undead outbreak, and they're saved
Yeah.
by guards, which some people could argue is very embarrassing. It's almost like Will Shatner getting saved by a bunch of red shirts. It just doesn't feel right. And I
Yeah.
wanted I wanted to make sure there was some type of gravity and relatability to all these characters for different reasons. But
Mhm.
very importantly, if you're going to be Superman, you got to have flaws in different ways.
For
Most
sure.
people can't relate to that. That's why it's very popular. Batman is always considered more popular for most, even though many could argue that the opposite in
Yeah.
against what I'm saying. But
Mhm.
I wanted to make sure that these fellas had some type of physical vulnerability. So when they go into something, it isn't, well, how is Superman going to win this time? This is a 3-issue miniseries. By the end of it,
Yeah.
you have nothing affiliated with these individuals. You have no idea if they're going to survive.
Yeah, and I got a chance to read the first issue last night. It was great, by the way. Um,
Thank you.
what I really liked about it, like you said, when you meet the characters, at first you don't realize that they're actually going to be the heroes, because when you go into this, you expect, like you said, that hero archetype, the big strong person, a la Superman. But these ones are very unlikely heroes, but I think, like you said, that's very endearing because, you know, they're not, it's kind of like the old saying, it's not the hero you want, but it's the hero you need, kind of sort of
Hmm.
thing, where it's
I
like,
get you.
it's not the hero you expect, but it's the hero you're gonna get.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what I really liked about it, the fact that, it's not your typical hero. They don't necessarily fit the typical archetype of a hero, but, you know, they're your hero and you want to kind of see how it's going to play out. And, you know, like you said with Superman versus Batman, I'm kind of in the same boat where I honestly I don't really prefer either one, but if I had to pick between the two, I would pick Superman over, or I'd pick Batman over Superman just because of the same thing where, Superman, it seems like he's got a solution for everything. He's because he's so stacked with superpowers and he's got all of this stuff. But Batman, he has to sit and think about what's going to happen and how we're going to, overcome an obstacle, which I always find a little bit, more interesting. So that's very cool. With the idea of what of the Madcaps, we talked about it a little bit earlier where you said it was inspired by your first D&D game. What was it about that made you decide, hey, I'm going to turn this into a story?
Well, a couple different reasons. When I first started playing D&D, I was a dungeon master. I can actually count on one hand how many times I've been a player.
Oh
But
wow, okay.
when I first started, I felt overburdened by the concept of modules guiding how a story would go. So I I didn't bit off more than I can chew. I kept chewing and I got it figured out, but I just did all homebrew, all from scratch, and
Cool.
all of this lore. Well, over the course of 10 years, as a dungeon master, when you plop somebody in for game zero or game one, everything they're in has to have some pre-existing history to it.
Sure.
So I had to do that. I had to flesh everything out and then execute with the players in in this reality that I made up. And then as they played over time, they all added to that lore, and certain questions they would ask or certain actions they would take would actually flesh the lore out that much more. So when I write this story for the Bad Caps, just these three issues, it is I tried really hard. You can't say everything in a comic, especially in a comic, because there has to be as least, or at least rather, as much show as there is tell. I
Sure.
can't talk about everything in dialogue. It's not a novel. It's a picture book,
Yeah.
but with more words, essentially.
Right.
And that kind of sounds bad when I say it that way, unintentional. But regardless, it's visual art.
Yeah.
It's telling the story. It's a movie that's in still motion. It's showing and telling. You don't want to patronize the viewer, the reader in this
Sure.
case. So um, I'm you I mean you're uh, a tertiary set of eyes. There are things probably mention it that alludes to a pre-existing history with insert variable here in the
Yeah.
first issue. First
Mhm.
one that comes to mind is Madrakis. He's very reluctant to get into Ivywood. Right at the start of that, he talks about the wording is, I wish this place forgot the bad as much as it did the good."
Mhm.
And obviously, well, why does he not want to be an Ivywood? And it sounds like it isn't just three issues. There's an entire reality. So I tried to apply that to the comic book. And my biggest thing, just to go back to what you were asking originally here, because there is such story in conjunction with liking comics, I figured that would be really cool to just kind of put on a panel. And I was only going to do it if I felt it was worthy of the industry. It's up to the readers to say whether or not it's good or whether or not they like it or if there's a
Sure.
fan base. I
Mhm.
can't control that, but what I can control is my satisfaction of I'm okay exposing this to the community and leaving it up for critique.
That's really all you can kind of do. You do what you can, then you just release your quote unquote baby out into the world and just hope that people like it. And if, there's going to be people that don't like it because, not everything is made for everyone, but
For sure.
you are definitely going to find people out there. I've always heard the saying, if you don't find what you're looking for, you should make what you're looking for, even if no one else,
I like that.
even if no one else reads it, because, if you don't if you're looking for something that you can't find, there's probably at least one other person out there that's looking for something very similar. So you should always take a chance and put your thing out there. And like you said with comics, everything you have to show it because it's different than like a novel. Me being a prose writer myself, it's very easy, you can just describe everything with words because, just because there's no other way to show everything. So it's kind of a definitely for some, including myself, it's a hard switch over to something like scripting or comics because you can't just describe everything out. You have to be able to show it. So that's very cool. Now you had mentioned that this is a three-story arc. Do you have plans for, let me back up a little bit. You said this is a three-story arc. Issue two is coming very soon. I want to take some time before I get ahead of myself. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming up with issue two.
Gotcha. So, uh, on the back half of issue one, the protagonists, after concluding or starting to guess that there's something to do with the local drug issue, one of the fellas, the dwarf Sarlacc, they all go back to a church that Sarlacc is running in Ivywood. And the reason being is there were a couple of junkies that Sarlacc sent there earlier in the issue. And he concluded if this outbreak was from one of them, which they, looking through some of the bodies, they find one without any bite marks or anything, and he recognized them as one of the junkies. And then eventually, after shaking down one of the individuals at the church, there's some type of they're going to go pick up some more product at a bridge outside of Ivywood, and that's where they do this ambush, and they're able to intercept, and they're just about to start interrogating two of the individuals. So this book, if you think of something like buddy cop movie or something like Law and Order, if you find somebody that's holding, eventually if they're willing to cooperate, you can work your way up the ladder. This issue, these guys, like you already mentioned, these aren't the ideal heroes, but because of the dwarf feeling obligated to get to the bottom of this, they start, we'll say, climbing the ladder. They're looking for, if this guy is a holder, well, who peddles the stuff, who distributes, who manufactures. That's what usually happens in a cop movie.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's necessarily the pattern here, but what I am saying is there is some rabbit hole that starts getting into not just users, but individuals that would supply these things. And just like you'd see in real life, if anybody's carrying this stuff around, they're going to have a lot of protection. So the real question that the reader should be asking going into the second issue, are they biting off more than they can chew here? That's kind of the theme of what to expect for the second issue.
Nice. So, I want to talk a little bit more about the second issue. Is there anything else you want to say? Let's let people know where we can find it or when it might be coming out so they can make sure they get notified.
For sure. So you can find it. We have a pre-launch on Kickstarter, Madcaps issue number 2. It will be launching in the new year. We're not going to give the exact date yet. I actually last week just started working with talent to start on the interiors and start on one of the covers, and I'm I'm holding back showing this stuff off, and the reason being is there's just timing when it comes to PR and exposure and marketing this stuff. But while you're waiting, you can find me on Facebook, known as DM Ray. DM is short for Dungeon Master. You can find me on Twitter. I don't use that one as much, or Twixter as they call it nowadays. I just haven't started establishing momentum with it, but you can find me on there. Instagram as Raymond the DM. You can also find the Madcaps Facebook page. Just look up the Madcaps. I'm sure it will show up accordingly. And I think that's all of the relevant ones. But for sure, you find that Kickstarter link and click follow. And that way, when it launches, you will be notified right away.
Very cool. And I'll make sure to put the link in the comments so everyone knows where to go. So we'll
You know
get
what?
that
I
taken.
forgot to ask you something. Do you have a preferred character that you like out of the four?
I actually was going to mention that. I really like the fact that I finally have found a cosplay now because I have myself a giant red beard. So I
You can
think
be Sarlacc.
I was looking at Starlack. I'm like, I could make that work finally. Because all my other cosplays I could do, as I'm not a big cosplayer, but if I ever was to do one, it'd be so and so character with a giant red beard. But because of the creation of Starlack, I'm like, man, I could finally be a cosplayer now. There'd only be a few people who would know who I am, but that doesn't matter because it would be incredible. So yes, Sarlacc was probably my favorite.
One thing I really like about Sarlacc is, in regards to the visuals of a dwarf, aside from the obvious, the beard and the height, and obviously the reveal of his lovely great axe,
Yeah,
his clothing is very different from your standard take of a dwarf.
yeah,
He's more of a wild guy of the woods as opposed to some armor-clad alcoholic berserker, if you will.
yeah. That was very cool. Yeah, and it was kind of neat to see that was, you would expect, a character like that to be a certain way. So the fact that you kind of swerved a little bit and made him different, I think was really cool.
But he definitely, the further this story goes, the more Sarlacc shines. They all have time to shine.
Yeah,
Sarlacc, he's got some hidden gems. I just haven't shown everybody's abilities yet. I've
sure.
hinted on them a little bit here and there. At one point in the narration, when Chazgo, because he's writing a letter during this all of issue number one, he talks about
Mm,
how Sarlacc is favored by the divine, which is something Sarlacc worships, and that will play in later. I've got some big promise for that. That's for sure.
very nice. Now, you mentioned this is a three-issue miniseries. Is there things you can talk about that are coming after this is over? Are you planning on maybe continuing the story of these characters in a different series? What can we expect from the future?
Um, I'm definitely interested. I made I wanted to produce this mini series just because I wanted to. I
Sure.
had no intention of continuing after. If it is successful enough and people are enjoying it enough, I think I will most definitely launch it do something else. I don't think I'm going to go and do something like an ongoing series, but I may just do clusters of mini series of a handful of issues. I
Nice.
think that is the way I do it, but you never know. We'll see. We'll get these three issues out of the way first.
Fair enough. So potentially after the third issue, this may not be the last we see of these characters.
Potentially, yes.
Very cool. Well, fans of medieval fantasy, fans of D&D, definitely check this comic out. It's like I said before, it's a great book. You should definitely give it a shot. And make sure like I said before, we'll put the link in the comments so you can follow and get all the updates on season two or issue two. And make sure let's follow Ray on social media so we can get all the updates because I'm sure there's going to be lots of juicy updates coming.
Yes, sir.
Very cool. So before I let you go, Ray, I want to let you get a chance to give a bit of advice to fellow creatives out there. What's some advice
Fe-
you could give?
Um, I wouldn't show anything to the world until it's finished. My late father, he used to have this saying, if you are going to update your roof and you hire a contractor, if you tell this to 40 people, suddenly you're talking to 40 roofers and they all have conflicting information. I would, if you're going to
Okay.
write a story,
Uh,
I would flesh out as much as you can because that's how you want it to be, and then take in critique after the fact. I think that would be a very important thing for any creator in any respect. That way, what you're giving or producing to a critic is more full. They're less likely to critique something when they see it entirely as opposed to only part of it, and then they're trying to make it their thing instead of yours.
I like that, because I've always heard the advice, if you want to do something, you tell people about it to kind of help inspire you to actually do the thing because it's easier to do the thing if you talk about it. But you make a good point there because, if you tell someone you're going to do it, it could end up being you're going to get people who are going to come and they're going to give you your 2 cents, even if it's something you didn't even ask for. And it's definitely going to happen. So that's an interesting perspective, and I kind of like that.
Also to add to that, it makes sense after the fact. If somebody has critique and you like, and there's something that you want to change because of critique, that's great. But many people, especially just getting started like myself, if you throw something out to the world, well, I'm not a pro, I'm not an expert. Maybe they're right. But the people suggesting elsewhere, they're best to have critiques after you have a final draft or something like that,
Yeah,
like you were just reflecting on.
yeah, I like that. Well, to find this interview, lots of other interviews, definitely check out Fueled by Weird on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, if you want the audio version. And you can also find me on the Spotlight Media GA app. It's a great app full of tons of great shows, including the Nerdy Man Room Show with Hassel and Monster, Hassel Review, and Big Rob's House of Entertainment and No Chinese Food. You can also find my show, Fueled by Weird, on Instagram and Facebook. Send me an email at fueledbyweird@gmail.com. Pizza Force by Polygon Horizon is the song that I use on this show. It's Polygon Horizon is a great band. You should go check them out on Bandcamp. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, The Zone Collectibles in Tifton, Georgia, your one-stop shop for comics, collectibles, and so much more. Now, with all those shows I mentioned earlier on the Spotlight GA app, we've actually gotten together to create the Stay Weird Media Network. Check us out on YouTube and Instagram, or send us an email at stayweirdmedia@gmail.com. It's a brand new podcast network we've made, so definitely come and check us out. We're just trying to make some entertaining content for the internet, and we want to bring back some awesome back to the internet because sometimes the internet's an awful place, and we want to kind of just make things a little bit better. If you like this show, please leave a review and tell your friends because word of mouth is my friend. And remember, kids, life's too short to be normal, so stay weird. Ray, thanks for showing up today and talking to me.
It was a good time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.